Hi everyone. Well, I'm here in Bonn, in Germany, to attend the Global Media Forum, which is hosted by Deutsche Welle. Lots of interesting conversations going on. But the world is keenly watching what's happening in Europe. Particularly, we saw the European Parliament elections, and which were held recently, and there were striking gains that were made by the right, by the far right parties, in fact. To talk a little bit more about how the alignments are changing, you have elections that have been called in by President Macron in France. I'm joined here by a journalist who is no stranger to India. He's actually lived in Mumbai for a while, some years ago. It's Thomas Seifert. He works for the European Voices. If you want to check out their website, it's europeanvoices.eu. Thomas, thank you for joining into this conversation.
Thanks for inviting you for this conversation. Thank you.
If I could start by saying, because France, Austria, Germany in particular seem to be where the far right parties have had significant gains. Tell our viewers of really what this means and which are some of the parties that have been able to do this.
Well, let's start with my home country, that's Austria. And the Freedom Party, which is a far-right party, made gains, and it came out on top. So it was on number one in the votes, which was, I think, quite a shock for the mainstream parties. So the Conservatives and Social Democrats, usually they dominated political space in my country, and now they suddenly find out that the FPÖ Freedom Party was number one. So that was a shock. And then your question was like, okay, this is France, in Germany, in Austria, why is that? And I think there is one explanation, and that is the simple one: migration. So basically, what these parties, and it's be it the AfD in Germany, the Freedom Party in Austria, or Marine Le Pen's party, what they have in common is that the anti-migration agenda is very high on top of the list, and you can say that probably on other issues they are not very strong. So basically, it's a one-trick pony. These parties, and the trick that the pony can do is basically jump through the hoop, of migration. And this is, I think, what, of course, for a lot of people, it's a very important topic, and therefore they gained. But I don't think that there is any other explanation that's really there, except for one, and I think this is also a similarity between Austria, Germany, especially France as well, I guess, and that is usually if you have a pessimistic outlook towards the world, you vote for the right-wing parties. If you have a more optimistic outlook towards the world, you vote for progressive parties. And unfortunately, this is not a time of optimism in our countries because of the war in Ukraine, because of many other issues, and that also, I think, did not help the, let's say, more center-left or center or the progressive parties.
Right. There was a lot of worry in other parts of the world that whether this would mean a certain realignment of forces within Europe.
Yeah.
Now, we do know that when it comes to the European Union, which is a bloc of 27 members, the European Parliament hasn't lost control in terms of the centrist political powers at the moment. So that looks safe. But does it mean that in the months to come, that political dynamic could change of who actually controls the parliament?
Well, the center held by and large, and I would maybe also even be willing to bet that Ursula von der Leyen, who is the Commission President, will keep that role, I think. And so I don't expect radical shifts in policies. I mean, you had shifts in policy already that the Conservative Party, especially Conservative parties, they more and more move towards, let's say, the right wing in terms of migration anyway. I mean, this is not a new development. So they kind of stick out the finger, see where the wind blows from, and they went in this direction before. And actually, there is also the issue again that migration means asylum, and that is the also, I think, the problem that basically all the lawmakers have in Europe, that we talk about asylum, and in fact, a lot of times it's migration, and the two things are mixed. And Europe doesn't have a migration policy, right? So it means that we are stuck with an asylum policy, which I think is very difficult to explain to people what is the difference between the two, where we do not have a migration policy. And the one fact is clear: Europe needs migration because it's an aging continent, so they need a workforce. And so the strange situation is that the right wing is talking about migration and scaremongering is busy with scaremongering. At the same time, politicians and managers go to India, for instance, to Philippines, to Sri Lanka, to all places where basically future workforce can come from to attract workers. And that is, I think, a very strange situation that I think the voters have not really made up their mind. What do we need? Who's going to take care of my grandmother? And on the other hand, whom I'm going to be afraid of when they come. So, yeah.
Let me just talk about two countries in a bit more specificity, because where I am in Germany, there the far-right AfD, it's managed to gain the second position. It's still ahead of the SPD, which is the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's party in power at the moment. They have shifted to party number third. In Germany, again, because a lot of time the perception is that Europe has been unwelcoming of refugees when it comes to Syria, Iraq, Afghans. But the attitude has been different to Ukrainian refugees. Does that still hold? Or how will this migrant conversation shape up? 2 years since, it's more than 2 years since the Russia-Ukraine war continues to wage. So is there also a war fatigue within Europeans, even when they are looking at Ukrainian refugees now?
Yes, I'm afraid there is war fatigue in general, also when it comes to support of Ukraine. That is a fact, I think. On the other hand, there was a difference between, let's say, how Europe was welcoming towards Ukrainian refugees or refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and the broader Middle East or South Asia. The thing, I think, is that, okay, Europe somehow understands that we are somehow responsible for what's happening in Ukraine in terms of that these are people that flee from Russian aggression, and it's our neighbors, basically. If you look at Poland and so on, but Syria are not our neighbors, or Afghanistan are not our neighbors, and I think that is a clear difference, which is, I think, human in the sense that you understand, okay, these are your neighbors, you have to take care of them. There's a lot of family ties, there's a lot of ties with Ukraine that is not the case with Syria. So I understand that, and I get it that from a psychological level, it's understandable that people have this feeling, okay, we have to take care of our neighbors. And then you could even argue, yes, that's what the region did, because how many refugees did we see in Jordan? How many? They took in thousands and even millions, Lebanon, Turkey. So it's very clear, I think, that the region always sees at first moment they have responsibility for the neighbors. And I think that's what happened in Europe as well.
In France, President Macron, he dissolved parliament. He called for snap elections, which will happen at the end of this month in 2 phases. What are the chances that a Marine Le Pen can actually replace a Macron?
Yes, I think everybody was surprised at how he would roll the dice. Macron very much believes in his own power and his ability to convince people. And this will be put to the test, I think. On the other hand, I mean, what was his calculation? We can only speculate. Even his friends and even close political allies were not informed up front, so we can only speculate. But what is the speculation that makes sense? The one is, okay, surprise is always good because the others are on the back foot. Number two, what is if the trend lines is against you? So even if you hold elections now, maybe somehow you can push back still, where you may be afraid that maybe in the future you can't. There's a young candidate who won basically a big chunk of votes in the European elections in France. So what about him? Is he even more attractive than Marine Le Pen? So then it's good to kind of push back now. That's what I think what his calculation is. The other is also, even if they win, what about the relationship between the new prime minister and the president? Because Macron will still be president. He might step back, but maybe he's thinking also, okay, this is a cohabitation. I will basically show to the French people that, okay, these guys are politically incompetent, and I will push back as a president, and you will see, don't vote for them. So when the presidential elections come around, then he wants to show, I think, okay, these guys are incapable. Even they were in government, now look what happened. They didn't do anything right, and maybe he can even make sure that nothing,
But did it look like
it's a very,
his
very
announcement
dangerous
of elections? Did it look like a knee-jerk reaction or a calculated risk that he has taken?
We can only speculate, but I think from what French experts said, well, it's his character, right? So it may be the former, a knee-jerk reaction. On the other hand, again, it's a gamble, and we will see how it pans out. But I think there is to just say, let's wait and do nothing, I think he also felt like, okay, this is a situation where he needs to do something. And of course, what he did, it's like, damned if you do and damned if you don't.
It did come as a rude
situation.
shock, for the drubbing that his Liberal Party received from Le Pen's National Rally and, of course, the opposition bloc. Just last two questions, Thomas, here. One is that it's not being ruled out that there could be a Trump coming back to US. If that does happen to be the case, the world is already seeing two continued wars in the Middle East, Russia, Europe, no signs of resolution. Are there further chaotic times ahead for us?
You just noticed, and also our viewers, how I drew in some air when you said that.
Yes, it was a long.
Yeah. Yes, because I mean, it's incredible that after what we saw in the United States in the Trump presidency, especially what happened afterwards, when he basically encouraged, you can say, the storming of the Capitol in Washington D.C. That this. Usually, you would think, okay, this is it. A person like this can never have any office anywhere in any country. And this is the United States, and we're sitting here, and you're asking a question which is quite serious. Could he be back? And of course, for Europe, it's a huge challenge because, to be very frank, Joe Biden is a transatlanticist. He's interested in very strong ties with Europe. He has this also Irish background, so he understands Europe very well. And he also thinks that, okay, this alliance is important both for Europe and for the United States. Donald Trump is very transactional. He basically also at one point said, well, if some European countries don't pay up, basically, then Mr. Putin, feel free to invade. I don't give a damn.
Yeah, with bearings for what NATO could look at, happening with it. So.
Yes, so I think this is a challenge. And also I think what makes me nervous a little bit is that if you look at political leadership in the most important countries in the world, basically, you have Xi Jinping, who I think you can call him a nationalist. You have Narendra Modi in India. You can call him a Hindu nationalist. You have Donald Trump. Actually, I'm looking for a word how to call him, but it's clear that he's a radical politician who is up to ending the status quo. And so we have, I think there is also and in Europe we don't have a clear, we had Angela Merkel, right? She was this towering European figure, and since she left the political stage, we lack this figure. And we just talked about Macron. Macron, I think, wanted to be this person, but then now we will see, because he will be very diminished. If this gamble goes wrong, he will be very diminished also on the European stage, and that means Europe doesn't have a leadership at all in terms of a person that can represent Europe on the international stage. And I think that will, the world is at the moment a very dangerous place.
Just a final question, again, keeping in mind the shifting equations within Europe, what would it mean, and the increasing shrill rhetoric, the polarization, what does it mean for Asian migrants who have come in legally into the system? You did mention that Europe lacks a migration policy, but for Asian migrants, are they justified in feeling a little bit nervous at this point in time?
Well, there's another interesting thing that we didn't talk about yet, and that is, where do most of the migrants go? So let's say, I talk about Austria because this is the place I know best, but I know that Germany is pretty similar. So you had the high turnout for right-wing parties, right-wing extremist parties in the rural areas. But the migrants that we are talking about, they're usually in urban areas, because where actually Europe is luring migrants is in the health sector, or in let's say to fill positions in kitchens, in hotels, in restaurants, etc. So this is the service sector basically. This is what we're talking about on different levels of skills, of course. And I think that is also that in the cities you didn't have that same voter dynamic. So if you look at Vienna, I think all over Vienna, the Social Democrats were on top, or number one. I think there was a district where the Greens were number one. There was a district where Conservatives, but not a single district of Vienna where the right-wing populists were on top. Not. So that is the strange thing, that where you have migrants, people are much more, let's say, welcoming. People understand it, because probably the problem with the migrant crisis, the so-called, is that if you don't know any migrant, it's like this little unknown ghost, right? That you can be afraid of. As soon as people have relationships with people from Asia, from the Middle East, and so on, they understand. Yeah, we are all human. Most people want a good life. That's all they're striving for. And suddenly you don't have that antagonism that you sometimes see. And also this political rhetoric doesn't really work, because as soon as you work, let's say in a hospital, and your colleague is from, I don't know, Philippines, another colleague is from Sri Lanka, there's one from Bangladesh originally, there's one from India. You work on a team and you understand that you need each other, and then suddenly the situation is, who cares where you're from? I mean, we're sitting here in this wonderful former parliament building here in Bonn, and at this moment while we're talking, it's not about you're from India, I'm from Austria. No, we're talking about the issues at hand and what we're interested in professionally, and suddenly this doesn't matter. And I think this is what you also can see in this election, that it's basically a political toy that some politicians want to toy with, but I think when it comes to how people work with each other, then things are different. And what is clear, and I think that is something that there is definitely the rhetoric works with let's say an anti-Islam agenda. This is certainly something that I'm also a bit concerned about, that this is kind of becomes kind of a Kulturkampf, as we say in German, like a cultural.
Thank you so much, Thomas Seifert, for for your clarity of thoughts, for all the insights, and as you reminded us that this is the old Bundestag, if I got it right, the German Parliament, where of course you now have the Deutsche Welle Global Media Forum being organized. Let me just show you around. There are journalists from across the world who have been invited in for this two-day conference. There are many conversations happening on journalist safety, on tools and technology, on how to deal with Gen Z, millennials, the rise of generative AI and its impact on newsrooms. But of course, what is more interest are all these sidebar conversations too on the political realities and the conflicts of the day. So if you like this conversation, do share, subscribe to my YouTube station, Smita Sharma Journalist, and do not forget to press the bell icon notification so that you get to know when I upload more content. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned in.
Please subscribe.
Yeah, that's Manisha Pandey. Manisha, that's a great message for me.
Subscribe, hit the like button.
Yay! That's a great sort of ad for me, plug in there for me. So thank you so much, guys. Bye.